The warden's life was seconds from ending, until the most feared gang leader in Block D chose to save her. But was he her salvation, or the deadliest trap of all? If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. The morning sun cast harsh shadows through the razor wire as Warden Sarah Harper walked the corridors of Huntsville Unit, her footsteps echoing against steel and concrete like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The Texas heat was already building, and by noon it would turn the prison into a pressure cooker where tempers boiled over and violence erupted without warning. Sarah had learned to read the signs in her 8 years running this place. The way conversations died when she passed, the subtle shift in posture among the guards, the electric tension that preceded a riot. Today felt different, though. Today felt like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. "Warden Harper," Officer Martinez called out, jogging to catch up with her purposeful stride. "We've got a situation in Block D, Snake Rodriguez again." Sarah's jaw tightened at the name, Marcus "Snake" Rodriguez, leader of the Bloodline Gang's prison chapter, had been a thorn in her side since the day she'd taken over as warden. Serving 15 to life for armed robbery and assault, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure among the inmates. More troubling, he'd been testing her authority with increasing boldness over the past few months. "What's he done now?" she asked, not breaking stride as they headed toward the maximum security wing. "Contraband in his cell. Pills, Warden, enough OxyContin to supply half the block." Sarah stopped abruptly, her dark eyes flashing with anger. Drug trafficking was the cancer that ate away at prison order from the inside. She'd made it clear from day one that dealers would face the full weight of her disciplinary power. "Has he been processed?" "He's in interview room C, waiting for you." The interview room smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation, a windowless box where careers were made and broken. Marcus Rodriguez sat at the metal table, his hands cuffed to a chain around his waist, but his posture radiated the kind of confidence that came from years of surviving in cages designed to break men's spirits. At 32, Snake still carried the lean, dangerous build of a street fighter, though prison walls had added muscle to his frame and hard lines to his face. Intricate tattoos covered his arms, serpents intertwined with gang symbols, dates that marked fallen brothers, and across his knuckles, the words "Death Before Dishonor" in faded blue ink. Sarah entered and took the seat across from him, placing a clear evidence bag containing 30 white pills on the table between them. She studied his face, looking for any crack in that mask of indifference. 23 Percocet, 7 OxyContin, she said, her voice steady as winter steel. "Street value in here? About $3,000. That's a serious business operation, Mr. Rodriguez." Snake leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Don't know nothing about no pills, Warden. Maybe somebody planted them while I was in the yard." His voice carried the trace of an East LA accent, smooth and mocking. Sarah had heard every excuse, every lie, every manipulation in the book during her years in corrections. But there was something in Snake's eyes today, a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify. "Your cell, your responsibility," she replied. "You know the rules. This puts you in solitary for 90 days. Minimum. You do what you gotta do, lady." The casual disrespect was calculated, designed to provoke her into an emotional reaction. Sarah had seen this game played by experts, and Snake Rodriguez was definitely that. But she hadn't climbed from rookie guard to warden by letting inmates bait her into losing control. "I will," she said, standing. "But first, I want to know who your supplier is. The pills didn't materialize out of thin air." For the first time, Snake's mask slipped slightly. His dark eyes, which had been flat and emotionless, showed a spark of something. Concern? Fear? It was gone before Sarah could be certain. "I told you, I don't know nothing about no pills." Sarah leaned forward, placing her palms flat on the table. "Mr. Rodriguez, in 8 years running this facility, I've learned to distinguish between the criminals who might be rehabilitated and the ones who are simply predators wearing human skin. I've never been entirely sure which category you belong in." Their eyes met across the table, two predators taking each other's measure. Sarah saw intelligence there, buried under years of anger and violence, but intelligence nonetheless. Snake saw something he hadn't expected in the warden's gaze, not hatred or disgust, but genuine curiosity about who he really was beneath the gang colors and prison reputation. "Maybe you'll figure it out someday," Snake said quietly. Sarah gathered the evidence bag and headed for the door, but his voice stopped her. "Warden Harper," she turned back. "You watch yourself in here. This place—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "It ain't always what it looks like on the surface." The warning hung in the air between them like smoke from a fired gun. Before Sarah could respond, Snake had returned to his mask of indifference, staring at the wall as if she'd already left. Walking back to her office, Sarah found herself thinking about that moment of genuine concern in his voice. In 8 years, she'd never heard Marcus Rodriguez express worry for anyone but himself. The pills were serious, but something about this whole situation felt like a piece of a larger puzzle she couldn't quite see. Her assistant, Mrs. Patterson, looked up as Sarah entered the outer office. "Warden, Deputy Warden Mills wants to see you when you have a moment. He said it was about the Rodriguez situation." "Send him in." Deputy Warden Tom Mills was everything Sarah wasn't, a good old boy from East Texas with 25 years in corrections, silver hair, and a tendency to solve problems with intimidation rather than intelligence. He'd been passed over for the warden position when Sarah got it, and their working relationship had been professionally cordial, but personally cold ever since. "Heard you had some excitement with our friend Snake," Mills said, settling his bulk into the chair across from her desk. "Standard contraband bust. He'll do his time in solitary." Mills nodded, but his pale blue eyes held an expression Sarah couldn't read. "That boy's been causing trouble since day one. Maybe it's time we considered transferring him to a higher security facility. Get him out of our hair permanently." The suggestion was reasonable on its surface, but something about Mills's eagerness bothered Sarah. Snake was dangerous, certainly, but he was also a stabilizing force among the bloodline members. Remove him, and the power vacuum might lead to a war between rival factions. "I'll consider it," she said noncommittally. "Just a thought." Mills stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, Sarah, you might want to vary your routine a bit, walking the same routes at the same times every day. It's predictable, and predictable can be dangerous in a place like this." After he left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring at the stack of incident reports on her desk. Mills's warning echoed Snake's earlier words, and she found herself wondering if there was a connection she was missing. As the afternoon shift change began, Sarah decided to take a different route back to her quarters in the administrative building. The corridors were quieter during shift change, most officers either heading home or just arriving for the evening watch. She was passing the mailroom when she noticed something on the floor, a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been slipped under her office door but missed its mark. Sarah glanced around, then picked it up. The message was written in block letters with a pencil stub. "They know you know. Watch your back. A friend." Sarah's blood turned cold as she read the words again. Know what? She'd been investigating some irregularities in the prison's medical supplies lately, but nothing that should warrant a warning like this. What do you think Sarah should do with this mysterious warning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Standing alone in the empty corridor, holding a note that suggested she was in danger from an unknown threat, Warden Sarah Harper realized that her ordered world was about to become very complicated indeed. Somewhere in the depths of Huntsville Unit, enemies were gathering in shadows, and the most dangerous game of her career was about to begin. The question was, who could she trust when the walls themselves seemed to have ears? The next morning brought no answers, only more questions that gnawed at Sarah's mind like hungry rats. She'd spent half the night analyzing the warning note, searching for clues in the handwriting, the paper, even the way the words were spaced. Nothing. It could have come from anyone, an inmate, a guard, even a visitor. Sarah arrived at her office earlier than usual, hoping to catch up on the medical supply audit she'd been conducting. For the past 2 months, she'd noticed discrepancies in the pharmacy records, missing bottles of prescription medications that didn't match the consumption reports from the medical staff. It was the kind of systematic shortage that suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate theft. She spread the pharmaceutical logs across her desk, comparing requisition orders with delivery receipts and usage reports. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Powerful painkillers and anxiety medications were disappearing at a rate that exceeded any reasonable medical need for the prison population. "Sarah, you're here early." Sarah looked up to find Deputy Warden Mills standing in her doorway, coffee cup in hand, his expression unreadable in the morning shadows. "Couldn't sleep," she said, closing the files casually. "Too much caffeine yesterday." Mills stepped into her office uninvited, his eyes scanning the papers on her desk. "Working on anything interesting?" "The usual administrative nonsense. Budget reports, staffing schedules." She kept her voice light, but something about his presence made her skin crawl. "What brings you in so early, Tom?" "Oh, you know how it is. This place never really sleeps." He sipped his coffee, still studying her desk. "Speaking of which, I heard some interesting chatter from the guards last night. Seems there's talk about someone nosing around where they shouldn't be." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. Prison guards gossip more than teenagers. I wouldn't put too much stock in idle talk. "Maybe." Mills set down his cup and leaned against her desk, too close for comfort. "But sometimes idle talk has a way of becoming serious business. You know what I mean?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. She grabbed it like a lifeline. Warden Harper. "Ma'am, this is Officer Rodriguez in the medical wing. We've got a situation here. Inmate collapsed in his cell. Might be an overdose." Sarah's blood chilled. "Which inmate?" "Marcus Rodriguez, ma'am. Snake. Paramedics are en route, but it looks serious." "Oh, I'll be right there." Sarah hung up and grabbed her radio, but Mills caught her wrist. "Sarah, wait. Let the medical staff handle it. You don't need to—" "That's my prison, Tom. My responsibility." She pulled free from his grip, noting the flash of anger in his pale eyes. "If an inmate dies on my watch, especially one as high profile as Rodriguez, there'll be investigations, questions." She left Mills standing in her office and practically ran toward the medical wing, her mind racing. The timing was too convenient. Snake gets busted with pills, ends up in solitary, then overdoses. Either he'd been holding back his personal stash, or someone wanted him silenced. The medical wing was chaos when Sarah arrived. Paramedics worked over Snake's unconscious form on a gurney, while Dr. Reeves, the prison physician, barked orders at the nursing staff. Snake's face was gray, his breathing shallow and labored. "What happened?" Sarah asked Dr. Reeves. "Classic opioid overdose. His cellmate found him around 6 a.m., barely breathing. We administered Narcan, but he'd been down for a while. Could be brain damage." Sarah looked at Snake's still form, remembering his warning from the day before. "Has anyone checked how he got the drugs? He was supposed to be in solitary." Dr. Reeves exchanged a glance with the head nurse. "Warden, that's not really I'm making it your concern, doctor. I want a full investigation into how contraband reached an inmate in maximum isolation." As the paramedics wheeled Snake toward the ambulance, Sarah caught a glimpse of his hand hanging limply over the side of the gurney. Something was clutched in his fingers, a small piece of paper. She moved quickly, pretending to check his pulse while palming the note. "Will he make it?" she asked the lead paramedic. "Touch and go. If we can get him stabilized at the hospital, maybe." But he was down for at least an hour before anyone found him. Sarah watched the ambulance pull away, then discreetly unfolded the paper Snake had been holding. Written in the same block letters as yesterday's warning was a single word: Mills. Her hands trembled as the implication hit her like a freight train. Snake hadn't overdosed accidentally, he'd been silenced, and somehow he'd managed to leave her one final clue before losing consciousness. Sarah needed proof, but she also needed help. And in a prison where she couldn't trust her own staff, there was only one place to look for allies: among the inmates themselves. She made her way to Block D, where the Bloodline gang members would be hearing about their leader's overdose. If Mills was involved in drug trafficking through the prison, Snake's lieutenants might know more than they were saying. "Warden on the block," Officer Martinez announced as Sarah entered the cell wing. The usual chatter died instantly, replaced by the kind of hostile silence that made her skin crawl. She stopped at cell D7, where Carlos Inc. Morales sat on his bunk reading a worn paperback. Inc. was Snake's second-in-command, a soft-spoken man whose gentle demeanor masked a razor-sharp intelligence and absolute loyalty to his leader. Morales. Inc. looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers without flinching. Heard about Snake? That's messed up. I need to talk to you. Privately. Inc. marked his place in the book and stood slowly. Talk away, Warden. Ain't nobody listening. Sarah looked around the cell block, acutely aware of the dozens of ears straining to catch their conversation. Not here. Interview room. Now. 10 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Inc. in the same room where she'd interrogated Snake the day before. The irony wasn't lost on her. 24 hours ago, she'd been trying to break through Snake's defenses. Now she needed his organization's help to save her own life. Your leader's in intensive care, she began. Massive overdose. Either he was hoarding drugs, or someone wanted him dead. Inc.'s expression didn't change, but his hands clenched into fists on the table. Snake don't use. Never has, never will. Lost too many hermanos to that poison. Then someone gave him a hot shot. The question is who? You tell me, Warden. You run this place. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. What if I told you I don't think I'm running it anymore? What if someone else is calling the shots and they tried to kill Snake to keep him quiet? For the first time, Inc.'s mask slipped. She saw fear flash across his features, quickly replaced by calculation. What you asking me, lady? Sarah pulled out the note with Mills's name and slid it across the table. Snake left me this. I think he was trying to warn me about something bigger than just pills in his cell. Inc. stared at the paper for a long moment. You wearing a wire, Warden? No. Why should I trust you? Because if I'm right, we're both dead if we don't work together. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Inc. spoke, his voice barely audible. Mill's been using the bloodlines to move product for 6 months. Real product. Heroin, fentanyl, enough to supply half of Houston. Snake found out Mills was cutting the drugs with battery acid and lied to stretch his profits, killing people on the outside. Sarah's stomach turned. And Snake was going to expose him? Snake was going to expose everybody. Mills, the guards on his payroll, the whole network. That's why he took the bust yesterday. He needed to get your attention without tipping off Mills that he was talking. The pills in his cell? Plant job. Mills needed an excuse to put Snake in solitary where his own guards could get to him easier. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Who else knows about this? Just me and Snake. We've been gathering evidence for months, but we needed someone with real authority to make it stick. Where's the evidence? Inc. hesitated, studying her face intently. Hidden in the chapel, behind the loose brick third row from the top, left side of the altar. But Warden. What? You go after Mills, you better be ready for war. He's got half the guard force on his payroll, and connections outside these walls that go all the way to the state capitol. You miss, and you won't get a second chance. What do you think Sarah should do now that she knows the truth about Mills's operation? Should she try to gather more evidence or act immediately? Let us know in the comments. Sarah stood to leave, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what Inc. had revealed. Deputy Warden Mills wasn't just corrupt, he was running a drug empire from inside the prison, using inmates as his distribution network and ordering executions to protect his operation. Morales, she said, turning back at the door. If Snake doesn't make it, he'll make it, Inc. said firmly. Snake's too stubborn to die. And Warden, when this goes down, you're going to need someone watching your back. The bloodlines got your 6. As Sarah walked back toward her office, she realized that everything had changed. The warden and the gang member had become unlikely allies in a war where the stakes were life and death, and trust was the most dangerous gamble of all. The real question now wasn't whether she could trust Marcus Rodriguez. It was whether she could save him before Mills realized his assassination attempt had failed. Sarah's hands shook as she locked her office door behind her, the weight of Inc.'s revelations crushing down on her like concrete blocks. Mills wasn't just stealing medications, He was running a sophisticated drug operation that stretched far beyond the prison walls, with connections that could reach her anywhere. She needed that evidence from the chapel, but getting there without arousing suspicion would be nearly impossible. Mills had eyes everywhere, and after this morning's coincidental visit to her office, he'd be watching her every move. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Patient stable but critical. No visitors allowed per family request. Sarah stared at the message, knowing there was no family making that request. Mills was ensuring Snake stayed isolated and vulnerable. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Mrs. Patterson entered with a worried expression. "Warden, I have Deputy Warden Mills on line 2. He says it's urgent." Sarah's blood turned to ice, but she kept her voice steady. "Put him through." "Sarah, terrible news about Rodriguez." Mills's voice carried false sympathy through the speaker. "Drug addiction is a disease, you know. Sometimes even the strongest inmates succumb to temptation." "Yes, very unfortunate." Sarah kept her words neutral, professional. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about varying your routine. Maybe now would be a good time to take some personal leave. This Rodriguez situation is going to bring investigators, media attention. Might be good for you to be somewhere else when the questions start." The threat was clear. Leave now or face the consequences. Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the office's air conditioning. "I appreciate the suggestion, Tom, but I have responsibilities here. I won't abandon my post during a crisis." Silence stretched across the line, thick with menace. Finally, Mills spoke again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That's what I was afraid you'd say. Have a good day, Sarah. Stay safe." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at the phone with the certainty that she'd just signed her own death warrant. Mills was done playing games. Now it was a race against time. She waited 20 minutes, then slipped out of her office through the rear exit that connected to the administrative parking garage. If Mills was watching her movements, she needed to seem predictable while actually planning something else entirely. The prison chapel was located in the oldest section of Huntsville Unit, a stone building that predated most of the modern security installations. Sarah made her way there through a circuitous route, using service corridors and maintenance tunnels she'd memorized during her early days as warden. Father Miguel was hearing confessions when she arrived, the elderly chaplain's voice a low murmur in the confessional booth. Sarah waited until he finished, then approached him with what she hoped was a casual smile. "Father, I hate to interrupt, but I need to inspect the chapel's structural integrity. We've had reports of loose mortar in some of the older buildings." Father Miguel nodded, gathering his vestments. "Of course, Warden Harper. I'll be in my office if you need anything." Alone in the chapel, Sarah moved quickly to the altar. The stone wall behind it was built from aged limestone blocks, and she found the loose brick exactly where ink had described it. Her fingers trembled as she worked it free, revealing a hollow space behind. Inside was a waterproof pouch containing a flash drive, photographs, and handwritten notes in Snake's precise script. Sarah's hands shook as she examined the evidence. Photos of Mills meeting with known drug dealers outside the prison, financial records showing suspicious deposits in offshore accounts, and most damning of all, a roster of prison employees on Mills's payroll. The scope of the corruption was breathtaking. Nearly a dozen guards, 2 medical staff members, and even a state inspector were listed as receiving regular payments. No wonder Mills felt untouchable. He'd bought himself an entire network of protection. Sarah pocketed the evidence and replaced the brick, her mind racing with possibilities. This was enough to destroy Mills's operation and send him to prison for life, but she needed to get it to someone she could trust. The problem was determining who in law enforcement wasn't already compromised. As she left the chapel, Sarah noticed Officer Jenkins stationed near the entrance, unusual since chapel security was typically minimal during weekdays. Jenkins avoided eye contact, but she caught him speaking quietly into his radio as she passed. Her blood ran cold. Mills already knew she'd been here. Sarah forced herself to walk normally back toward the administrative building, but her mind was screaming warnings. She needed help, and she needed it now. The evidence in her pocket felt like it was burning through her clothes, marking her as a target for anyone in Mills's network. She made it halfway across the main courtyard before the first sign of trouble. Officer Reynolds appeared from the guard tower, walking deliberately toward her with his hand resting on his service weapon. To her left, Officer Martinez emerged from the housing unit, also moving to intercept her path. Sarah's training kicked in. She altered course toward the visitor's entrance, where civilian oversight might provide some protection, but Officer Bradford stepped out of the sally port ahead of her. They were boxing her in, professional and methodical. "Warden Harper," Reynolds called out, his voice carrying across the concrete. "Deputy Warden Mills would like to see you in his office, right now." It was a command, not a request. Sarah looked around the courtyard, calculating distances and exits. The main gate was too far, and Mills's corrupted guards controlled every choke point. She was trapped in her own prison. "Of course," she replied, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Lead the way." As they escorted her toward the administrative building, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. She could try to signal for help, but who could she trust? She could attempt to run, but where? Mills controlled the prison like a spider at the center of a web, and she was walking straight into his parlor. The deputy warden's office was larger than Sarah's, decorated with Texas memorabilia and photos of Mills posing with various politicians. He was seated behind his desk when they arrived, his pale eyes tracking Sarah's movement like a predator watching prey. "Gentlemen, wait outside," Mills said to the guards. "The warden and I need to have a private conversation." When the door closed, Mills stood and moved to the window overlooking the prison yard. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Clear skies, perfect visibility. You can see everything from up here." Sarah remained silent, her hand unconsciously moving toward the pocket containing the evidence. "I know what you found in the chapel, Sarah." Mills turned to face her, his expression almost sad. "I know what you think you understand about my operations here. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Tom." Mills laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Come on, Sarah, we're past that now. Snake Rodriguez has been feeding you information for months, hasn't he? That's why you've been so interested in the medical supply audits. That's why you refused to transfer him when I suggested it." Sarah's mind reeled. If Mills knew about her connection to Snake, then he'd been watching her far longer than she'd realized. "Here's what's going to happen," Mills continued, moving closer. "You're going to give me whatever evidence you took from that hiding spot. Then you're going to submit your resignation, effective immediately, citing personal health concerns. You'll leave Texas and never speak about anything you think you've discovered here." "And if I refuse?" Mills smiled, but his eyes remained cold as winter stone. "Then you'll join Rodriguez in the hospital. Except your condition will be permanent." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her radio, but Mills shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Remember, I know which guards are on duty today. They're all my people." The trap was perfect. Mills controlled the prison, the guards, and apparently had enough political protection to ensure any investigation would die before it began. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her like the bars of a cell. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "You have until tonight, 8 p.m., my office. Bring the evidence, bring your resignation letter, and this all goes away quietly. Don't—" Mills moved close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of corruption. "Don't make me prove how serious I am about protecting my business interests." As Sarah left Mills' office, escorted once again by his guards, she realized that her war for justice had become a desperate struggle for survival. With Snake fighting for his life in the hospital and herself trapped in a prison run by criminals, she was running out of time and options. But as she walked through the corridors of Huntsville Unit, Sarah caught glimpses of inmates watching her with knowing eyes. Ink's words echoed in her mind. "The bloodline's got your six. Do you think Sarah should trust the gang members to help her or try to find another way out? What would you do in her situation? Share your thoughts below." Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as Mills believed. In a place where the guards had become the criminals, perhaps the criminals could become her salvation. The clock was ticking toward 8 p.m., and Sarah Harper was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to survive the night. At 7:45 p.m., Sarah sat in her office staring at a blank resignation letter on her computer screen. The evidence from the chapel was hidden in her desk drawer, and every fiber of her being screamed against surrendering it to Mills. But what choice did she have? His network was too vast, too embedded in the system to fight alone. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Chapel, 5 minutes. Come alone. A friend. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. It could be a trap, another layer of Mills's web designed to eliminate her before the 8 o'clock deadline, but it could also be the lifeline she desperately needed. She slipped out of her office through the rear exit, making her way through the darkened corridors toward the chapel. The night shift guards were all Mills's people, and she could feel their eyes tracking her movement through the security cameras. The chapel was dark, except for the eternal flame that flickered behind the altar. Sarah pushed through the heavy wooden doors, her hand instinctively reaching for the evidence in her jacket pocket. Warden Harper. She spun toward the voice and found ink emerging from the shadows near the confessional booth. But he wasn't alone. 3 other Bloodline members flanked him, including Tommy Ghost Valdez, the gang's most feared enforcer. "What are you doing here?" Sarah whispered. "If Mills's guards find you—" "They won't," Ink interrupted. "Ghost took care of the cameras in this sector. We got maybe 10 minutes before someone notices the loop." Sarah looked around the group of hardened criminals who had somehow become her only allies. "How did you get out of your cells?" "You'd be surprised what we can do when we need to," Ghost said, his scarred face splitting into a grim smile. "Ink told us about Mills's ultimatum. We figured you might need some backup." "This is insane," Sarah said, but even as she spoke the words, she felt a surge of hope. "You're all risking solitary confinement, additional charges." "Snake risked his life to protect you," Ink said quietly. "We ain't about to let that sacrifice be for nothing." Sarah pulled out the flash drive containing Mills's evidence. "This has everything. Photos, financial records, a complete list of everyone on his payroll." "If I can get it to the right person." "That's the problem," Ghost interrupted. "Mills got people everywhere. State police, district attorney's office, probably the FBI field office too. You send that evidence through normal channels, it disappears." "Then what do you suggest?" Ink stepped forward. "We create a distraction. Something big enough to bring in outside investigators that Mills can't control. Federal marshals, maybe Texas Rangers, people who don't answer to local politics." "What kind of distraction?" "A riot," Ghost said simply. "Full-scale prison riot. The kind that makes national news and brings federal oversight down like a hammer." Sarah stared at him in horror. "People could be killed. Innocent guards, inmates who aren't part of this." "People are already dying," Ink said harshly. "Snake's in a coma because he tried to do the right thing. You'll be dead in 15 minutes if we don't act. How many more bodies does Mills get to stack up before someone stops him?" Sarah's mind raced through the implications. A riot would indeed bring outside attention, but it would also destroy her career and possibly end innocent lives. Yet what was the alternative? Let Mills continue poisoning the streets with contaminated drugs while using the prison as his personal kingdom? "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "Maybe there is," a familiar voice said from the chapel entrance. Sarah spun around to find Snake Rodriguez leaning heavily against the doorframe, his face pale but his dark eyes blazing with determination. He was wearing civilian clothes and moving like every step caused him pain, but he was alive and conscious. "Jesus, Hermano," Ghost breathed. "You should be in intensive care." "Check myself out AMA," Snake said, slowly making his way toward them. "Had some help from a nurse who don't like seeing patients get mysterious visits from prison guards." Sarah stared at him in amazement. "How did you get here?" "Let's just say I got friends outside these walls too." Snake reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "More importantly, I got something Mills don't know about." "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Audio recording of Mills talking to his supplier. Real detailed conversation about distribution routes, payment schedules, and something else real interesting." Snake's eyes met Sarah's. "He's planning to frame you for the whole operation. Make it look like you were the mastermind, and he was the honest deputy who discovered your corruption." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not only was Mills planning to kill her, but he intended to destroy her reputation and make her the scapegoat for his crimes. "The recording's already uploaded to a secure server," Snake continued, "along with copies of all the evidence from the chapel. If something happens to us tonight, it gets automatically sent to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in Texas." You set up a dead man's switch, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. Learned a few things about insurance policies over the years. Snake managed a weak smile. But we still got a problem. Mills is expecting you in his office in 5 minutes, and he's got enough firepower to take down a small army. Sarah looked around at the 4 gang members who had risked everything to help her. Snake, barely able to stand but refusing to quit. Ink, whose quiet intelligence had seen through Mills's operation from the beginning. Ghost, whose fearsome reputation masked a fierce loyalty to his brothers. Tommy, the youngest of the group, who looked terrified but stood his ground anyway. "So what's the plan?" she asked. Snake straightened, wincing with pain. "We give Mills exactly what he's expecting. You show up to his office, surrender the evidence, submit your resignation, play the defeated warden." "That's suicide." "Not if you're wearing a wire and we're listening to every word." Snake pulled out another small device. "State-of-the-art recording equipment, courtesy of some friends who want to see Mills go down as much as we do." "What friends?" "The kind that carry federal badges and been investigating Mills's operation for months. They just needed someone on the inside to help them build an airtight case." Sarah stared at Snake in amazement. "You're working with federal agents?" "Let's just say my past ain't all bad decisions in gang colors. Sometimes a man gets a chance to balance the scales." Snake's expression grew serious. "But this only works if Mills thinks he's won. You gotta sell it, Warden. Make him believe you're broken, defeated, ready to disappear." Sarah took the wire and recording device with trembling hands. "And if something goes wrong, then we come in loud and hard," Ghost said grimly. "Prison riot was always the backup plan." As Sarah prepared to walk into Mills's trap, she realized that everything she thought she knew about criminals and justice had been turned upside down. The most dangerous man in the prison was wearing a badge, while the gang members branded as irredeemable were risking their lives to protect an innocent woman and expose corruption. "Why?" she asked Snake quietly. "Why risk everything for someone who spent years seeing you as the enemy?" Snake met her eyes, and for a moment the hardened criminal mask fell away completely. "Because somebody's got to stand up and do what's right, even when it costs everything. My daughter, she'd be about your age now if I hadn't screwed up so bad. Maybe doing right by you helps balance some of that karma." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. "Snake, go," he said firmly. "Mills is waiting, and we got federal agents positioning outside the prison as we speak. Time to end this." As Sarah walked toward what could be her death, she carried with her something she'd never expected to find in a maximum security prison, the knowledge that heroism could emerge from the darkest places, and that sometimes the most unlikely people become your salvation when everything else falls apart. The question now was whether she could act well enough to fool a man who had made murder his business, while depending on criminals to save her life. At exactly 8 p.m., Sarah knocked on Deputy Warden Mills' office door. The recording device felt like it was burning against her chest, and she forced herself to slump her shoulders in apparent defeat as she entered. Mills looked up from his desk with a satisfied smile. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality even in surrender." Sarah placed a manila envelope on his desk, the fake resignation letter she'd prepared, along with printouts from an empty flash drive. "You win, Tom. I can't fight this anymore." Mills opened the envelope and scanned the documents, his smile widening. "Very wise, Sarah. Very wise indeed. And the real evidence? The flash drive from the chapel?" With trembling hands, Sarah placed the empty drive on his desk. "Everything's there. Financial records, photos, the roster of your people, all of it." "Excellent." Mills pocketed the drive without checking it. His overconfidence would be his downfall. "You know, I'm almost sorry it came to this. You were a good warden, just too honest for your own good." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, letting exhaustion creep into her voice. "Now you disappear. New identity, relocation assistance, a comfortable retirement somewhere far from Texas. All I ask in return is your silence." Sarah looked up at him with what she hoped appeared to be desperate hope. "You'd really let me live?" Mills laughed, the sound echoing off his office walls. "Sarah, I'm not a monster. I'm a businessman. Dead wardens bring investigations, missing wardens who resigned under stress. That's just another career casualty in a dangerous profession. And if I ever try to come back, Try to tell someone what really happened here? Then you'll join Rodriguez in the ground. Mills's mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold killer underneath. But you're too smart for that, aren't you? You know I have connections everywhere. Police, prosecutors, judges. Even if you found someone willing to listen, who would believe the word of a disgraced former warden over a decorated law enforcement officer? Through the wire, Sarah knew Snake and the federal agents were recording every word. Mills was confessing to conspiracy, drug trafficking, attempted murder, and threatening to kill both her and Snake. There's just one thing I need to understand, Sarah said, playing her role perfectly. Rodriguez, Snake, he really was trying to expose you. That piece of garbage thought he could play hero. Thought his street connections and prison reputation made him untouchable. Mills shook his head in disgust. I've been planning his elimination for months. The overdose was supposed to look accidental, but the stubborn bastard survived longer than expected. So you'll try again? Won't need to. He checked himself out of the hospital AMA tonight. Probably dead in an alley somewhere by now, or will be soon enough. My people are very thorough. Sarah's blood ran cold. Mills didn't know Snake was alive and coordinating the takedown. The federal agents would have heard that confession too, a direct admission of attempted murder. What about the other inmates, the ones who might know something? Mills waved dismissively. Criminals killing criminals. Prison riots happen all the time, unfortunately. Very tragic when witnesses don't survive the violence. Another confession. Mills was planning to eliminate every member of the bloodlines who might testify against him. Sarah realized with horror that her allies were walking into a death trap. She had to warn them, but breaking character now would destroy everything. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, as if struggling with her conscience. Tom, I need you to promise me something. Whatever you do to clean up loose ends, make it quick. These men have families, children. They may be criminals, but they're still human beings. Mills studied her with calculating eyes. You always were too soft-hearted for this job. But yes, Sarah, I promise it will be quick, professional. My people are experts at making problems disappear permanently. The words were barely out of his mouth when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the office in an eerie red glow. Through the windows, Sarah could see tactical flashlights moving across the prison yard, federal agents taking their positions. What the hell? Mills started to rise from his chair, but the door to his office burst open. Snake Rodriguez stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in federal tactical gear. Despite his pale complexion and obvious pain, his eyes burned with the fire of justice finally being served. Deputy Warden Thomas Mills, one of the federal agents announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, attempted murder, and violations of civil rights under color of authority. Mills stared at Snake in shock. You're supposed to be dead. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, Snake replied, his voice steady despite his physical condition. But your career? That's definitely flatlined. As the federal agents moved to handcuff Mills, he looked at Sarah with pure hatred. You set me up. You've been working with them all along. No, Tom, I was just trying to do my job. Snake was working with the feds long before I knew what was happening. You destroyed yourself with your own greed. The federal agent in charge, a stern woman with silver hair, stepped forward. Agent Martinez, FBI. Warden Harper, are you injured? I'm fine. Sarah's legs nearly gave out as the adrenaline began to fade. How long have you been investigating this? 8 months. Mr. Rodriguez contacted us after discovering the drug operation. We've been building a case ever since, but we needed someone in administration who could access the financial records and confirm the scope of the corruption. Sarah looked at Snake with new understanding. That's why you kept testing my authority. You were trying to get my attention. Snake nodded, leaning heavily against the doorframe. Had to make sure you were one of the good guys before we brought you into it. Couldn't risk Mills finding out we had federal backing. Agent Martinez continued. We have arrest warrants for 17 prison employees, including 12 guards, 2 medical staff, and 1 state inspector. This takedown is happening simultaneously across 3 facilities. As Mills was led away in handcuffs, he stopped and turned back to Sarah. This isn't over. I have friends in high places, powerful people who won't let one operation destroy their interests. Actually, Tom, Agent Martinez said with a cold smile, your friends are being arrested as we speak. Turns out Mr. Rodriguez's recording equipment was very sophisticated. We've got wiretaps on everyone in your network. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Federal agents swarmed the prison, making arrests and securing evidence. Sarah found herself giving statement after statement, recounting every detail of Mills's operation and her own inadvertent involvement in bringing him down. As dawn broke over Huntsville unit, Sarah stood in her office, now truly hers again, looking out at a prison where justice had finally been served. Snake sat across from her desk, still pale but alert, an FBI agent taking his final statement. So what happens now? Sarah asked when they finished. Now you rebuild, Agent Martinez replied. The Bureau is recommending you for a commendation. Your cooperation was instrumental in breaking up one of the largest prison-based drug operations in Texas history. Sarah shook her head. I didn't do anything heroic. I was just trying to survive. Sometimes that's what heroism looks like, Snake said quietly. Doing the right thing when everything's falling apart around you. Agent Martinez nodded toward Snake. Mr. Rodriguez's cooperation with this investigation, combined with his actions to protect you, will be taken into consideration at his parole hearing. The Bureau is recommending early release with time served. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. Snake, Marcus, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Warden. Thank me when I'm walking out those gates a free man, ready to start over. Snake managed a weak smile. Maybe I'll look up that daughter of mine, see if there's still time to be the father she deserved. 3 months later, Sarah stood at the front gate of Huntsville unit, watching Marcus Rodriguez walk toward freedom. He carried a small duffel bag containing his few possessions and a letter of recommendation from the FBI attesting to his cooperation and character. You sure you're ready for the outside world? Sarah asked as he reached the gate. Marcus looked back at the prison that had been his home for 8 years, then forward toward the road that led to his new life. Scared as hell, if I'm being honest, but scared in a good way, like when you're about to do something that might change everything. You have my number if you need anything. Job references, someone to vouch for your character. Appreciate that, Warden Harper, but I think it's time I stood on my own 2 feet. Marcus extended his hand. Partners? Sarah shook his hand firmly. Partners? Now go show the world what real redemption looks like. As Marcus walked toward the waiting car that would take him to his new life, Sarah reflected on the lessons learned in those dark days when corruption had nearly destroyed everything she'd worked to build. She'd learned that heroism could emerge from the most unlikely sources, that justice sometimes required trusting those society had written off as irredeemable, and that the uniform didn't always identify the good guys. 6 months later, Sarah received a letter with a return address in San Antonio. Dear Warden Harper, thought you'd like to know. I found my daughter. Elena's 28 now, married with a little girl of her own. Took some convincing, but she agreed to meet me. We're taking it slow, but she says she's willing to give her old man a chance to prove he's changed. I'm working construction now, honest work that leaves me tired but satisfied at the end of each day. Some nights I still wake up thinking I'm back in that cell, but then I remember. I chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. That choice gave me back my life. The bloodlines are doing better too. Ink's been accepted to a college correspondence program. Ghost is teaching literacy classes to younger inmates. Funny how having hope changes everything. Thank you for seeing past the tattoos and the reputation to the man underneath. You gave me a chance to be a hero when I thought I was just a convict. Your partner in justice, Marcus Rodriguez P.S. My granddaughter's name is Sarah. Elena says it's in honor of a very brave lady who helped her daddy come home. Sarah wiped away tears as she finished reading, then placed the letter in her desk drawer next to her commendation from the FBI and a photo of the Huntsville unit staff, the new, honest staff she'd hired to replace Mills's corrupted network. Outside her office window, the Texas sun was setting over the prison yard where inmates moved through their evening routines, under the watchful eyes of guards who served justice rather than greed. It was a place where redemption was possible, where second chances could bloom even in the harshest soil. Sarah Harper had learned that sometimes the most dangerous criminals wore badges, while the most heroic souls wore prison uniforms. In the end, what mattered wasn't the uniform you wore, but the choices you made when everything was on the line. What do you think about Marcus's journey from gang leader to hero? Have you ever had to find courage in an unlikely place? Share your stories of unexpected redemption in the comments below. And in a world where cynicism often ruled and hope seemed naive, that was a lesson worth remembering. That every person carries within them the capacity for both darkness and light, and that sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal which one will triumph. The question isn't whether people can change, it's whether we're brave enough to give them the chance to show us who they really are when it matters most. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.